Before we get into this week's episode, shout out to Andrew from Alula, the complete solution for smart security hardware and software. Andrew left us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which helps us reach a larger audience. So thank you, Andrew. If you want a mention at the top of one of our shows just like this, you know what to do. And if you don't, because probably you don't, here are the details. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And if you include your name or company name in the review, we will give you a shout out on a future episode as a thank you. Visit constantvariables.co/review and we will take you right there. This episode is brought to you by the Jed Mahoness Group. We build best-in-class iOS, Android, and web apps. We do this by integrating with teams that lack mobile expertise and work together to deliver creative mobile solutions that solve actual business problems. To learn more about us and to see our pricing, something we're very transparent about, visit jmg.mn. Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Tim Bornholdt. Let's get nerdy. This right here is a very special episode of Constant Variables. It is our 100th episode, and it's also our first episode of the new year. So after doing 100 episodes, I thought it would be super cool to introduce you guys to the people and the business behind the show. So let's start with the people. We have Jordan Daust and Jenny Karkowski. Jordan and Jenny, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Tim.
Fun to be here on this side of it.
I was going to say, both of you have been part of this virtually since day one. And it's very exciting to have you on this side of the microphone and to get the mic flipped on me. But before we jump in and do that, I wanted to give both of you a chance to introduce yourselves, talk about your day jobs and how you fit into the show. So Jordan, why don't we start with you? Tell us about yourself and how you got roped into helping us out with this.
Well, yeah, thanks, Tim. My name is Jordan Daust. I currently work for a local live AV production company as the director of operations called Avex. And I've been there for about 9 years now. Before that, I was a sound designer and live sound engineer for live theater. And as far as how I got roped into this, I believe, Tim, you went to high school with my lovely wife, Megan, and saw that I was maybe doing sound somewhere and reached out and asked if I was interested. And turns out I was. And this was a few years ago now. And, we did one, we tried it out, and now we're 100 episodes later.
It's worked out pretty well, I'd say. I mean, I think I remember having to cut at least maybe like the first episode or two. And I thought this isn't going to work out like to host and edit. And I thought, yeah, like, why don't we bring in somebody that can actually edit and make me sound really good. So I'm really glad that you answered the call. Now that, you've been doing this for a while, I'm sure you have this down to a science. Does it usually, like, how long does it usually take you to get an episode edited and maybe walk through what editing actually entails for you here?
Yeah, so I basically plan for about twice the time of the actual podcast itself. So if it's an hour-long podcast, it's probably going to take me 2 hours. There's always, strange circumstances if, someone has a dog barking in the background, which, I don't know, you may hear from my side sometimes. But, anything like that, sometimes that takes a little bit more time. Room noise, wind, fan, anything like that. Those can kind of elongate the process. Sometimes if it's just a super smooth interview, it can take me, just a little over the time of the actual interview. And as far as my whole editing process and all of that, I use Logic Pro X. I've been using that for a super long time. I mean, at this point now I'm going on, 10 years of using Logic. And every single episode that comes in, when I upload it, it all comes in with the same settings that we've sort of over time kind of come up with that work. And I drop all the files in, everyone starts clean, if you will, and then I go ahead and do some equalization, maybe someone, again, there's noise in the background, whatever it may be. So each episode ends up being different, but they all start with the same level of processing. And all of the outboard processing, the bounce to disk, all of that, those are all the same. So I try to keep it as concise as possible with this is how the podcast sounds. But as we all know at this point, we're in the world of COVID and everything is remote. So, laptop microphone, someone's home microphone, all of that can kind of change everything.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm always amazed at what you're able to edit out because I listen to the raw side of every episode. So before Jordan has edited it, I listen to it to put together the show notes and the description of the episode. And so I hear, all the dogs barking or the kids interrupting or the cell phone going off in the background. But then when the live episode comes out, there's hardly any of that to where it's, you don't even notice it if there is.
Yeah, it can be a real trip sometimes, and not to get too personal, but people have mouth noises and little burps and hiccups and all that stuff where it's when I'm listening along on headphones very carefully, it gets interesting.
Not me though, right? It's always the guest.
Oh, Tim, you're perfection.
A consummate professional.
Never anything that I wouldn't want to hear.
That was my next question, was that I've heard that there's a rumor that you've made a blooper reel of Tim, and I was wondering if you had anything good.
Especially on the early days when it was Tim and Rob just kind of talking, there's a lot of stuff that might not be shareable publicly. But, honestly, my favorite part is before and a little bit after each of the episodes, especially beforehand when Tim is talking to whoever it is that he's interviewing, and they're just talking. They're just regular people, and it's not an interview. And I mean, there's a lot of gold in there, and there's some goofy stuff, here and there, but all in all, it certainly has been a pleasure. And there's a lot of stuff that the audience doesn't hear that is really nice.
I was going to say, I probably can't now let you go because if I do, you've got enough blackmail on me to just really take us down. So I have to keep you happy.
Oh, I mean, at this point, you're stuck with me.
I think that's just fine. One last question for you, Jordan. I know starting out this podcast, I don't think you had a super deep background in mobile app development and all the stuff that goes into building custom software. But now that you've listened to, pretty much every single episode, I'd say, what have you taken away from the show? Do you actually enjoy it, or is it something where you're just like, it's a job. I get paid whatever.
Well, in the before time for me, I actually did work for the Nerdery. I was at the Nerdery for a little over a year as an AV and kind of catering type person, where I worked on a lot of their parties, and I did help set up a podcast that they were recording and working on their Nerdatorium. Which was live events and streaming. So I had learned some stuff about the software development world beforehand, and then having this pop up on my radar really kind of piqued my interest. And I was like, well, hey, let's give this a shot. There are some podcasts that I think, boy, this is way over my head, but I mean, anything involving social justice and equality, those interviews to me are incredible. I have gone back and re-listened to after I have edited some, and I have recommended some to other people. There's been a couple guests that talk about management style, and I think I heard about Trello through here. So I have taken, I think a significant amount from editing these podcasts, because I am, it's my job to listen to them, but I take so much from them, and so many of the guests are just incredible people that it makes it really interesting and fun for me to edit it, because I'm really just listening to a great podcast.
It's good because when I go back and listen to episodes too, I'll go back, episodes from 6 months ago or something where they were released 6 months ago and recorded, 7 or 8 months ago, and I don't remember anything about it. But going back and listening to it, I even am like, oh my God, I can't believe that actually I relearned something that I had forgotten. So I'm glad that this has been a good experience for you from that side, and also just from from a professional side. We really wouldn't be able to do this without you. You are phenomenal at what you do, and I try to make sure I shout your praises from the mountaintops where I can, because you are really good at your craft. So we're very, very fortunate to have you aboard, and here's to another 100 working with you here.
Well, absolutely. And I wanted to, kind of ask you, at the end of every episode, you have some sort of a word that you describe me as. Where does that come from? Who is that you coming up with that? Is that Jenny? Who's coming up with that?
Tim had the original idea, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah. I came up with the idea because I thought you deserved some sort of adjective before everything, and I was like, I got to think of different adjectives. So I thought of like the first 10 or so. I kind of came up with them off the top of my head, and then I started to challenge myself, and I got like a Google sheet and with each letter of the alphabet, and I tried to find a good adjective for each one. Eventually got to the point where Jenny started writing all of the show notes and doing all of that stuff. So I told her she needed to pick it up. So I'd say for the last, 20 or 30 episodes, it's been Jenny's adjectives, and I've laughed every time. So it's those things that make me laugh. At least I hope they make you laugh too.
So Jordan, I have a whole spreadsheet of positive adjectives about you if you ever need them in alphabetical order.
It's always funny, and it's always a fun thing for me to, tell my wife after I'm done editing, like, so here's what Tim said about me this week. And it is very flattering, and I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. And that's what this is about. It's a show of learning. And I love to, there's words too where I'm like, I didn't know that was a word, so I'm just going to throw it in there, and we'll all learn together. I just hope that in context, it's positive, because there's sometimes I find words where I'm like, I don't know if that's if that's a good thing or not, honestly, but we'll give it a shot. Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite parts of the show, is coming up with those words. I'm glad Jenny has it now, because it's she does a good job with it too. And Jenny, now that we're on the topic of you, let's roll right into you. So tell us how you got roped into this crazy podcast.
Well, I work with you at JMG. I've been doing the marketing for the past 2.5 years now, and I'd say when I first started, you were kind of taking a hiatus from the podcast because you had recently had a second child. Good time to need a break. And one of the goals that we had was to get the podcast back up and to start bringing on more guests and expanding our network, making more connections. So we started there with me mostly just finding the guests, and then that evolved into writing. We do sort of like a general outline before each episode. Sometimes Tim follows it, sometimes he doesn't. Typically the episodes where he doesn't turn out to be the best. But yeah, so I started doing the outlines for the episodes, and then once they're recorded, put together any of the links and the descriptions and titles that Jordan plugs in that get I'm not sure how all that happens, but whenever we upload it to Libsyn, our podcasting host provider, it pulls in all the metadata with all the details about the show. So I write all those too. So I've been doing it for probably 2-ish years now, and it's my favorite part of my job.
Yeah, it's just like we couldn't do the show without Jordan, I certainly could not do the show without you either, because you find just the most incredible guests, and those notes, while sometimes I do tend to ignore them from time to time, they actually do a really good job of getting the conversation started and setting the tone for the direction we're going to take the podcast. So I again could not do this without you. And pretty soon our audience is going to start to be hearing more of your voice through this podcast. Why don't you explain why that is?
Yes, I need to work on my radio voice. Won't be hearing me so much on the interview side of it, but the kind of the introduction to the show and the outro, you'll start to hear my voice a little more there as I kind of introduce our guests and ask you to rate and review the show like Tim did at the top, and then tell you how to connect with everybody at the end.
Yeah, it's going to be nice to have, as I've been getting busier and busier with the day job, it's going to be nice to have you taking on some more of those roles so I can just come in and talk to the guests and then you take care of the rest. I think it's going to turn into a pretty nice, well-oiled machine. And are there other plans that we've got for the show coming up this year in 2022?
Yes, I'm excited for the beginning of 2022. For the next couple months, we're going to start working on an expert series around some technical jargon. So I think for the past, 4 years almost that the show's been around, or at least 100 episodes, that we've done a pretty thorough job of talking about mobile app development in as many non-technical ways as we can. And so we're going to try to expand that into other industry jargon. We've got some incredible guests lined up to talk about robotics, autonomous vehicles, data mining, quantum computing. I don't know what half those are, so I'm excited to tune in and listen and learn. Putting the show notes together, or not the show notes, but the episode outline for those. I'll have my work cut out for me. But yeah, if you're listening and you are an expert in any kind of emerging tech and you'd like to come on the show and talk about it, please reach out to us.
Yeah, it's feeling like after 100 episodes, I think we've pretty well covered what it takes to build mobile apps specifically. But, the whole intent of this show and what I'm really passionate about is explaining technology to people that feel like it's unapproachable and mysterious, because frankly, it is. I mean, who just kind of knows what Ethereum is and doesn't need to have a crash course and watch 700 YouTube videos to figure it out? I mean, it is confusing. And same with like autonomous vehicles. Just how does a car drive itself? There's so much cool stuff within technology. And so I think this is going to be a fun direction to push the show, is to bring on experts that can help us kind of explain all these crazy complex tech things without me needing to, just kind of preach at people. It's fun to have a back and forth dialogue about it. So I think the next year of episodes is really going to be our best ones yet.
You're really going to get to put your analogy making skills to the test, taking these complex terms and turning them into some house metaphor that we can all understand.
Jordan, have you been enjoying all of the analogies that come up?
Sometimes I question them, like, does that really make sense? But hey, so I don't know everything about technology and app development, so I gotta just trust you.
It's okay to call me out on any BS that might come out, because it's better to be, I want to be accurate above all else. So that's the important thing here, is to have good analogies, not just halfway analogies. Well, for the second half of this podcast, I'm going to shut up and, I guess I'm at least relinquishing the host duties and giving those over to you two, because now it's time for you to ask me questions, I guess.
Put you in the hot seat.
All right, Tim. So the first question I want to ask you is the same question you usually ask the first of any entrepreneur on the show. You're a co-founder of the Jed Mahoness Group. Can you tell the story of how the Jed Mahoness Group came to be?
Yeah. JMG, it was a happy accident, I'd say. My best friend from high school, who was on previous episodes, Rob Bentley, we just hung out a lot in college. And as college was ending, I was all set to take a job in video production. That was where I really wanted to pursue, was doing just broadcast journalism. And while that was going on, I still had a desire and a really strong interest to build mobile apps. I had waited in line for day one when the iPhone came out. I hacked the phone open when jailbreaks became a thing and wrote apps before Apple had an SDK out. And it was just, for me, I just wanted to know how it worked, because iPhones were so, if you weren't around then to experience it, like the first time, it was just mind blowing how much better an iPhone was than anything else that came before it. So I wanted to just build for it. And I didn't want to commercialize that. I just wanted to do it. But Rob had graduated from a different college with a degree in business. And he, as I had a job lined up in Duluth at a TV station, Rob approached me, and when we were getting lunch one day, and he's like, you know this app stuff. Why don't you build apps? I'll go and sell them. Let's just see what happens. And we each took $250 and threw it into a bank account. And it was I was thinking about this the other day. When we opened our bank account, this is how little we knew about business. We walked into the bank and we said, we need a business bank account. And they were like, okay, in order to open a bank account, you need to have articles of incorporation, and you need to have board approved minutes that authorize you to open a bank account. And I was like, okay, we'll go do that. Just a second. So we went out to the lobby, and I took out a piece of paper and was like, okay, I call this meeting of the board of directors of the Jed Mahoness Group to order. And we authorized it right there and made up an agenda and then handed it back to her. It was written in pencil and on a piece of notebook paper. And she's like, good enough. So, that's how little we knew about starting a business, but we jumped in and made a website and hung up. It was basically hanging an open sign. They always say with businesses, you can't just hang an open sign and expect people to come to you. But honestly, that's how it happened for us. We put our open sign up on the internet, and we ended up, because I've done so much web development stuff, I knew SEO. And so we ranked really high for Minneapolis app developers. So people came across our website, they took a chance on us, and we've grown it to where we're at today.
Nearly 10 years later, right?
Yeah. It'll be 10 years in March.
10 years in March. I'll have to, I think there's a picture from that day, or maybe it's from when you first LLC'd the company of you and Rob. It's a really great picture that I think you share every year, but I'll put it in the show notes for people to see.
Yeah, it was, Rob and I were very proud, because normally people just send the application in and that's it. But we were, just being jerks, and we decided we were going to drive down to the office and file it in person. And when we did that, we were like, we should take a picture to commemorate this. So I gave my phone to the lady that was doing the paperwork, and she took one picture, but it was she hit the shutter button while she was moving the phone down. She just did not care at all. So it's just the most blurry, awful picture you've ever seen, but that's the only picture we have from the day that we incorporated. So that's our, that's the milestone picture.
I don't know if you've talked about this on the podcast. I don't remember, but where did the name Jed Mahoness come from?
So the name Jed Mahoness is from when Rob was growing up, he had a pen name. When he was in third grade, he came up with Scott Mahoness. And for his whole life, he had just kind of gone by Scott Mahoness as his alter ego. When we were in high school, we did a TV announcements class together, and this was in the era of Anchorman. And we thought we needed cool Anchorman names. We couldn't just be ourselves. So Rob had Scott Mahoness already. And so he told me the secret to coming up with a pen name, which is between the first name and the last name, one of the names needs to be a normal sounding name, and the other one needs to be a really weird sounding name. So in Rob's case, it was Scott Mahoness. In my case, I came up with Jed Harrison because Jed, it was originally Jeb because I thought of Jebediah Springfield, but Jed sounded a lot cooler. So I went with Jed. And then Harrison is because my favorite president of all time is William Henry Harrison, because he was our president for exactly 30 days and then died. So my pen name was Jed Harrison. And when we started our business, we decided like we didn't want to be, not ripping on the nerdery, but we didn't want to be like the nerdery or MentorMate. Like we didn't want to have a kind of techie sounding name. We wanted to have just like a name that kind of reflected me and Rob. So we went with the two weirdest parts of our pen names and we threw them together. And that's how you get Jed Mahoness Group.
You guys sound like quite the team.
Yeah. Speaking of the team, can you talk a little bit about how it's evolved over the last 10 years, along with maybe how the clients have changed or just the focus of the business has evolved in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we, again, had zero focus and the team was just me and Rob, and we were trying to get everything done by ourselves. And as time has gone on, we've had a lot of different people kind of filtering through, a lot of different developers. Some very, very talented people have worked with us. We've kind of gone heavy on the hiring full time, and then we've moved to a contractor model, and we've moved kind of back and forth between how the team is made up. But for the most part, we've got developers, we've got QA people, project managers, we've got you, obviously, Jenny, doing marketing for us. We've been kind of growing in that regard, and it's as a reflection of our focus, because again, we were just trying to build apps for whoever, but I think we've really narrowed it down to building apps for businesses now, and helping businesses solve actual business problems. Like when I say that in our intro and whatnot, I actually mean that. And it sounds like what every other business says that's in our space, but it's true. Like we really want to work with businesses that have complex problems that we can automate away or build software that makes it so it's not a problem anymore, or less of one at least. So we've gone from having a lot of mom and pop smaller clients to having bigger companies that we've been working with to help solve more complex problems that need a really good dedicated team that's adept at taking what's the newest stuff in technology and marrying it to what are the new problems that we're seeing as a result of, take a global pandemic or just everybody online or whatever the case may be. Being able to understand those problems and give solutions to them, that's really been our focus over the last few years now.
So, Tim, on most of your podcasts, if not all of them, you are talking about entrepreneurship. I mean, it is a big focus of what you talk about and the relationships that you foster. So that being said, you started JMG just a couple years out of college. You're a founding partner in other businesses. What about being an entrepreneur do you enjoy? And also, I want to know, what are the struggles? What are the hard parts?
Well, I think what I enjoy about being an entrepreneur is just, once you become an entrepreneur and you start to see, like, I always throw out that Steve Jobs quote on this show. I know you guys are sick of hearing it, but it's the one where once you realize you can push on life and move things to be the way you want them to be, the world just becomes your oyster. Like you can really make it the way you want it to be. And that's what's really great about being an entrepreneur is, like, if you are sick of working in a job that you're not happy with, if you're not happy with what you're doing in the moment, you can change it. You can talk to people. You can make your own destiny, do your own thing. So that's what I like about being an entrepreneur, is just every day is a new challenge. There's always new problems to solve, and there's new people to work with, and to, take what you're really good at and marry it with what somebody else is really good at. Like the kind of relationships you forge building a business and seeing that business grow into doing something successful is just, it's intoxicating. Like it's something that I don't know if I'll ever be able to not do it now that I've been doing it for so long. But on the flip side, like you said, there are struggles. I mean, there's been countless times that we've had to, really worry about, are we going to make payroll this month, or where are we going to find our next client from? Just ask Jenny. I mean, we've been trying for 2.5 years now to really narrow down what our core target market is and what our core customer is, and it's still just an ever evolving thing. And sometimes it gets frustrating because you start to think you're making good headway. And the thing with marketing and sales is it's one of those things where you do something today, you're not going to see the benefit of it until a year or 2 or even 3 down the road. So you have to take these kind of calculated risks and stick with it until you can see it through. But then you also have to make sure you're not just following it into, the pit of despair either. Like, you have to actually make sure that it's going to pan out and everything. So, it's a roller coaster. And I think in a time right now where, like, in our country, we've got a really big mental health crisis. Like, everyone's dealing with depression and anxiety and just worrying about all kinds of things, regardless of where you lie on a political spectrum or on a social spectrum. It's like everyone's stressed out about everything. And so that when you add that in concert with having to be responsible for salaries for lots of people and also getting, like, these projects that we take on. I mean, like, take Turn Signal as an obvious example. It's like that app literally saves people's lives. Like, there's no getting around it that having that in people's cars is going to make a big impact in people's lives. And so having that kind of responsibility of making sure that you're actually delivering what you're promising to these people is a very big stress and a very big burden. So I think balancing, like, the stresses of entrepreneurship with seeing some successes on the flip side of it is it's a very big challenge. And I really enjoy big puzzles and big challenges.
That roller coaster emotion you mentioned is something that I hear a lot of entrepreneurs say when you interview them on the show. And the conversation between the two of you almost becomes a little therapeutic because each of you can relate. And it's just like, I don't know, misery loves company maybe, but it kind of seems to lift you both up a little bit. Have you noticed any other common themes about entrepreneurs from all these conversations that you've had?
Yeah, I know you prompted us with these questions before, and this one I was really struggling with trying to think of, like, what some other common themes would be. It is like you said, the biggest one is just being able to empathize with, not only do you have to be good at, usually, I guess, okay, here's a good one. Entrepreneurs are really good at one thing, like the thing that they want to do, whether that's running the business from, like, an administrative or operations standpoint, or whether they're really good at marketing, or they're really good at building software, or they're really good at manufacturing whatever. It's like they're really good at that. And then everyone, I think, that is like a true entrepreneur struggles with the delegation part of it from time to time. Because I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, it's like sometimes I feel like I can just jump in and do it myself instead of trusting somebody else to do it. But man, take marketing, for example. I was in charge of marketing before you came on, Jenny, and you saw how terrible it was before you got here.
I would not say terrible. Look at all the SEO that you did to get the high rankings on Google before I even came around. So I would not say terrible.
Okay, well then subpar, we'll say. Compared to, like, what you've been able to come in and help us with, like, I think that was for me, like, a big personal success was being able to, like, say, okay, I'm trusting you, Jenny, just go and do it. And thankfully you're a rock star that just goes and does it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that I interview and chat with have those same struggles, but then see also how powerful it is once you do kind of let go of having to have your hand in everything and just say, okay, I'm going to focus on this. If someone else is focusing on that for me, then I don't need to keep my eye on that ball. I'll just check in and make sure we're still moving in the right direction, but I trust that you got it. So I'd say that's probably another big common theme that I see with entrepreneurs here.
Man, I like having control too much. I don't think I could ever be an entrepreneur. My type A personality, I don't know that it would work too well.
I think you could figure it out. Like, I mean, you've been getting good at letting go of certain things within the company. And, I think if you meet other people like you that you can trust with it, then I don't know. It ends up working pretty well, I think. But yeah, it's not like that's another hard thing, is just finding the right people and building the right team. That's something that I think most good, successful entrepreneurs that I've seen on this show are good at too, is being able to, judge people and what they can do and make good decisions quickly as to whether this is going to be a person that fits in well with the company culture or whether they need to find a different opportunity.
Speaking of good decisions and finding opportunity,
nice segue.
Thank you. After you had started Jed Mahoness, you're 6 years in and you decide, hey, we're going to start a podcast and we're going to call it Constant Variables. I'm curious as to where that name came from, although I think I kind of understand it after listening to it. But the main question here is, how does Constant Variables fit into the Jed Mahoness group?
Well, I guess the name first, I don't remember how. I know I came up with the name, but I can't remember. I think I was just kind of riffing on technical terms because there's when it comes to programming, it's if you think back to like algebra, you always have X within equations. Those would be variables. There's certain variables in programming that are constants. Like once you declare, this variable X equals 1, then you can't later on go and change it to say X is 2 because you said this is always going to be 1. So, that's where like there's constants and there's variables. And I thought like constant variables, that kind of sounds like a cool name for a show where there's just, especially with app development, there are just constantly changing variables within how all of this stuff shakes out and how apps come to life. So I don't know. I'm terrible at naming things. I like to I say that a lot because I think it's true. But that one I'm actually kind of proud of. So I'm going to own it and say, hey, I can sometimes come up with good names if you give me enough opportunity, I guess. And then, how does it fit into the bigger picture? I mean, again, I think our company, the way that I've been trying to steer it over the last 10 years is I want our company to be known as the one that you can trust. We're going to tell you exactly what you need to know, and we're going to make sure we actually solve your problem with reasonable timelines and budgets, and that you're really happy with what you get at the end of the day. And, part of being able to deliver that kind of commitment is to build up that trust. And I think one of the easiest ways to build up trust is to explain what you're doing. Just be very transparent. I think laying out, here, for example, like the other day, our shower down in the basement started dripping, and like when you turn it off. And so I, of course, went on YouTube and I watched 5 videos on what is it when your shower drips. And there's all these plumbers like put out videos that's like, hey, I'm so-and-so from this plumbing company, and here I'm going to show you how to fix a drip. And they show you how to take apart your whole thing and change the cartridge and blah, blah, blah. And you're watching it and you're like, hey, I could do that. That's pretty easy. That is actually a pretty easy repair. And later on down the road, you might think back to, oh man, well, okay, I fixed that thing, but now like there's a gasket that blew off of the valve, and now there's water all over the place. So I need a plumber. I'm going to trust that guy that showed me, hey, instead of me coming out and spending $300 to replace the cartridge in your shower, I'll just tell you how to do it real quick. So then later on down the road, you can pay me more money to fix actual confusing problems that you need to have training and practice on. So when it comes to building software, I think everybody can learn the fundamentals. Like everyone should be able to learn the fundamentals of how apps work. Like, you don't need to know exactly what an API is, but if you're wondering like, how do I hook up my software with Salesforce, or how do I integrate with Twilio or whatever, like I think it's important for everyone to, in this day and age, like technology is part of every job. So I wanted to have a resource that people could turn to just listen really quick on a conversation of, how does this stuff work? How do apps get built? What are the pieces I need to know? And not necessarily that you can then go out and build your own app, because it's not as easy as just because you know what an API is doesn't mean you know how to consume them or talk to them. So that's kind of what I thought of for the podcast was, here's a really good way to kind of show off what we know in a actual helpful way, so that later on down the road, when people actually have problems that they need a technologist to help solve, they'll think of us because we gave them just really good free advice, thanks to your guys' work for lining up the guests and for making us sound good.
And you said you weren't good at marketing.
No, I'm not.
So before you started Constant Variables, you were already pretty familiar with the podcasting space. You were editing another podcast that you still edit today. Can you talk a little bit, because we talk about podcasts often during the show and the power of it for a business. And so I'm curious how you got working in the podcast space, what drew you in?
So this is like, I guess, a little embarrassing, but when I was growing up, I used to listen to, there was a radio station in town called Radio Oz, and it was essentially a radio station for kids. It's kind of like Radio Disney, but it was way, way, way better. And I would call in to that station. I called in so much they actually blocked my number because I was winning too many prizes. So they were like, you can't call in. You have to wait like 60 days from now on between winning prizes. And just like, well, all right, I guess I'm just too fast on the draw, but they had this thing called I think it was like Air Force or Radio Force One or something like that. Like it was like they had a program for kids to come on and be DJs, and they were like 4th through 6th grade kids, and I was like so wanting to do that because it sounded like so much fun. Being on the radio just seemed so cool. And I by the time I got to 4th grade, though, Radio Oz had gotten acquired by Radio Disney and then just shut down entirely. So I never got to live out my fantasy of being a DJ, and I know a lot of people that do work in radio, and they all say it's terrible. So like, it sounds exactly like getting into TV. Like you don't just get to go and work in a like KDWB, for example. Like you have to go and work at like a AM station way out in the country at the 10 o'clock at night shift on a Saturday. For years until you build your way up to working the good stations with the good shifts, and you get paid nothing. So I was just, I figured a future in radio and a future in being on TV was not really in the cards for me. But I've been listening to podcasts for a really long time, and I thought it seemed like something that I could do and that it would be really fun. I just never really had a topic for it. I never really wanted to build just a show where I talk by myself into a mic, because that gets really boring. So I think that's kind of what led me to wanting to be a podcast host here. Was I thought it's a cool idea to merge what I enjoy, which is technology, and also being able to talk into a microphone and be comfortable interviewing people. It's been a skill that's been really fun to cultivate over the last few years. So you're right. Like I also do edit another podcast. It was originally a YouTube series that when we had my first kid, we decided to turn it from a YouTube series into a podcast, because editing audio is it's challenging, not as challenging as having to edit audio and video at the same time, and more so in having to capture all of that, because I'd have to go and we would record these videos. It was like I think they say usually like an hour or like a minute of video takes an hour to edit. And we were editing these 8 to 9 minute YouTube videos. So do the math. It was just, I was taking way too much time. So I told Carrie that the show I host is called that I edit. The show that I edit is called C-Tolly Run. And Carrie Tollefson, who's this Olympic athlete here in town, I told her when we did the switch, I'm like, we gotta stop doing video, because I'm not going to have time with a kid and all of that. So I think it's serendipitous that usually I make these big podcast life decisions around the time that I have kids. So hopefully I don't have another one anytime soon to stop the train that we've got going here.
That's awesome. I didn't actually know that about you. So that's interesting to me. That's great. I kind of nearing the end of our little interview here, or our backwards interview. We're obviously 2021 was quite an adventure. 2020 was a dumpster fire. What goals do you have coming up in the next year for JMG? And also, if you're going to hop in your TARDIS, what's going on in the next 5 years?
Oh, man. So I think when I think about JMG, when we started our business, like I mentioned earlier in the interview, it was we just were kind of like, let's just build apps and see what happens. I think we've gotten to a point now where we've been doing this long enough that where we really have been shining again is building those apps for corporate clients and enterprise clients. We also have a really big soft spot for startups, and I don't want to entirely give up on that. I know we've got a couple of startups in the works that we're starting to chat with, but where I really want to see JMG go for the next year is to find a couple more big name, not big name, but just big companies that need help in the mobile space, building out software that's going to help their teams work more efficiently. So that's where I think in the next year, it's going to be really looking at our processes and getting us to a point that we can scale and bring in more developers and get stuff done faster and with better quality. Over the next 5 years, I think I can see us moving even further into newer mobile technologies that are going to be emerging. I talk a lot about augmented reality on this show. I really feel like there's going to be some device. Like there was an article that just came out a couple of weeks ago from an analyst that said Apple internally is talking about how in the next 5 years, we're not even going to have iPhones anymore. There's going to be some new augmented reality device that we're all wearing somehow that's what will be our primary interface with the internet and mobile technology and stuff. So I think that's where I want to just keep pushing our company is to thinking about these emerging technologies like Web3 is a big thing with blockchain technology and all that. We also have a pretty strong partnership with an autonomous vehicle company. And I know they've got some interesting projects coming down the pipeline that would be an interesting space. So I guess, over the next 5 years, I just want us to continue to innovate and look at where mobile technology is going and make sure that we're able to provide those services to any companies that might need to integrate that into their process. Well, I think this has been fun. Obviously, we're recording this late at night. I know Jenny used this to get out of giving her kids the bedtime routine, which I don't blame. I did the exact same thing. And Jenny, since we talked about you kind of taking over intros and outros for the show going forward, I want to see how you bring the show in for a landing and wrap things up.
You can learn more about the Jed Mahoness Group at jmg.mn. And you can connect with Tim, Jordan, or myself on LinkedIn. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by sending an email to hello@constantvariables.co. That'll go right to me. Or you can find the show on Twitter at CV_podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the witty Jordan Daust. As Tim mentioned at the start of the episode, if you can take 2 minutes to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we will give you a mention in a future episode as a thank you. Visit constantvariables.co/review and we'll link you right there. Or if you have the Apple Podcast app open on your phone right now, you can head to the main show page for Constant Variables, scroll down, and leave a rating and review that way. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahoness Group. If your team needs mobile expertise, we'd love to work with you. Give us a shout at jmg.mn.